Thank you. So firstly, an apology. Some of the things I'm going to say you've already heard today. When I was preparing my material, I did not realise that the other presenters were so smart and wise. So you may have seen some of this before. So yes, I'm going to talk about solving the problem of there being more work than time and money will allow, which is a phrase that I stole from a book called The Agile Samurai, which is really a great book with a terrible name. And obviously, as technology leaders, what we need to do is somehow find a way to balance this inequality. And given that time and money are very likely to be effectively fixed, what we want to do then is find a way to shrink the work to match the resources that we have, and to do that in sort of an optimal way where we get the best of all possible outcomes. So there's three different ideas that I'm going to cover. The first is Peter Drucker's idea that the job of the effective executive is to get the right things done. The second is around product strategy. So what that is, why we care, and how we can go about putting that together. And then once you have your strategy worked out, you think it's the best thing that you could be doing, then obviously we need to execute that strategy. So the third thing that I want to talk about is agile product delivery. Pressing the wrong button. Okay, so getting the right things done. Since we can't do everything, we need to work out where to invest our effort and our resources. I don't know about you. In fact, I'm curious what your opinion is on this, but I feel like the last 20 years or so has really been focused on execution, how we take something we've decided and produce it in the most efficient way possible. Is that, you kind of feel that that's where we put our effort? So that remains a really difficult thing to do, but I think there are increasingly a body of knowledge about how to build software efficiently, and more organizations are doing that. So that means that if we want to have a competitive advantage, if we want to separate ourselves from everybody else, you can't do that through efficiency of execution, because the returns get smaller and smaller, the more that you improve. So I think where we need to set ourselves apart from what everybody else is doing is in how good we are at working out what exactly it is that we should be doing. And I think Dave kind of alluded to it earlier, that you can think of this two ways. You can think of it as being the problem of selecting what we do, or you can think of it as being the art of what we don't do. That's okay. So keep doing that. I've got kind of three rough sections to cover on that topic. The first one is prioritization. So with all these things we could possibly do, how do we work out where to start and how to proceed? Given that delivery performance is effectively fixed within whatever your particular organization is, how do we work out where to invest our efforts? The second is the idea of velocity. And I mean velocity the way that a physicist would use that term, which is to say the combination of a speed and a direction. So lots of places are focused on the speed part, measuring story points delivered per sprint or some of these kind of metrics. But if we're moving very quickly but in the wrong direction, then we're actually going backwards, because not only are we not proceeding to our goal, we're also delivering all of these artifacts that then become a burden. Everything we create, we have to maintain, we have to document, we have to market. So the goal should be to create as little as we possibly can to still achieve the goal. And disobedience, obviously being a little bit facetious there, but something that I learned as a consultant from really the very early days when I first set up my own business, and I thought, I don't like the way that sales is done. I've dislike it sort of morally and ethically. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to go to my potential customers. I'm going to say, what is it that you need that I can do for you? And then whatever they tell me, that's what I'll go out and I'll do. And I don't have to worry about that whole sales thing. I can just have this honest conversation about what people want. The problem is that doesn't work. So what's the problem with asking somebody to tell you what they want and then doing it? Well, they think they know what they want, though.
You're not asking them to pay you anything yet.
Yeah, I got better at that over time as well.
The answer will probably change when you start asking for money.
Yeah, so maybe they don't know what they want. Generally, I find that they do have a very fixed idea of what they want, but they're wrong, essentially, is the problem. And you learn from experience that by doing that set of things that you've been asked to do, you will get whatever the outcome is that corresponds to their plan, which is very likely not the optimal one. And nobody thanks you after the fact for having followed the directions if they don't get the outcome that they want. So instead of doing that, what we want to do is we want to step back and say, okay, that's great, you've got this precisely defined idea of what you want. Why is it that you want that thing? What are you actually trying to do? And then go from first principles forward to come up all over again, essentially, with what's the best thing that we can do given the constraints that we have. I was a CTO until recently, and when I was leading my team in that company, I came up with the idea of this value equation, which is, it's a model that helped me to think about performance. So that's performance as an individual level, performance of a team, and even performance across the entire organization. And it's very simple. So the idea is that the value we create is a combination of working on the right problem, doing good work, and working quickly. And the other thing that's important to understand about that is I mean it in that order as well. So the most important thing here by far is this concept of making sure that we're working on the highest value thing that we could be working on. There are many forces, particularly that act on a CTO, that will push you towards putting your effort into something that might be the second or third priority. For example, you may have a CEO who is a big fan of blockchain and might say, hey, I really think you should do something with a blockchain, right? So there we have an influence that there's a strong political motivation for us to invest our effort there. And we need to be thinking about, it isn't just that we're doing the blockchain thing, it's that whilst we're doing that not top priority item, what are we not doing? Okay, so it's that issue of you can only do one thing at a time, so everything is an opportunity cost. All right. So strategy. I want to define this because I think it's one of those words that's overused and has come to kind of lose all its meaning popularly. So to me, a strategy is a clear understanding of some objective that we're working to, combined with a complete causal plan for how we get there from where we are. We do this, which leads on to this, which leads on to that, and it has to be an unbroken chain from where we are to where we want to go. That's my concept of a strategy. And I find that I work with a lot of different organizations, and very few of them can articulate a clear technology strategy. It's common to have a strategy like, we want to be Australia's fastest parcel delivery company. Okay, so that isn't a strategy. What is it? It's a wish, yeah. It's a wish, it's a hope, it's just the end goal without the planning part. Or you might have that, and we're going to do it by buying a fleet of helicopters. So now we have the end and we have the start. Well, what's missing is everything that comes in between. So to me, your strategy has to cover that entire journey. There's an analogy that I like, but struggle to articulate, so bear with me. And I'm going to say something very obvious. Water flows downhill. So when we want to control water and bend it to our purpose, we work with that nature that it already has. We dig trenches, we lay pipes, we encourage it to follow its natural inclination to get the outcome that we're looking for. And what I've observed is that people and systems behave very much the same way. So I think I heard something about this a little bit earlier today. When people are behaving in a way that doesn't match our expectations, we have to ask that question, like, well, why are they doing it? Because people don't tend to go off the reservation. They tend to act rationally within the system that they find themselves. So there's usually some kind of systemic reason for these things. And we can use that idea to our benefit. How can we control the forces in our environment to get the outcome that we want? And that's what I want you thinking about when you're thinking through how do I create a technology strategy, which is what I want to talk about now. How do we create a strategy? I can tell you some good ways not to create a strategy. Don't pull one out of thin air. Don't do brainstorming. Don't declare a strategy with the strike of an executive pen. What we want is to have some kind of a logical, rational process for working out how to spend our money. And the step one, another thing I came up with during my stint as a CTO was the idea of initiative proposals. An initiative proposal is a small document prepared by somebody who wants something from the technology team, where they summarize a thing that we could potentially do. So it's very important that this is not a work item going into a queue to be delivered. It's just a possibility at this point that becomes an input to the strategic planning process. One of the reasons is that there's an asymmetry of effort when you have that scenario of somebody asking the technology team to do something. Say the CFO comes to you and they say, I would like a dashboard for accounts receivable. Okay, and then they go away. So at this point, their investment in this whole initiative is the 60 seconds that it took to have that conversation with you. And you don't know whether that is the top priority for the organization or if tomorrow they're going to have completely forgot about it and never mention it again. So by having the proposal initiative in place, what you do is you say, okay, here's a Word document template, go away, fill this in with your idea and bring it back to me. So straight away, 80% of ideas just are gone because we've raised the amount of effort required and addressed that asymmetry a little bit. And if that doesn't happen, then we've encouraged them to think through their idea a little bit and clarify what they see as being the risks and the downsides and the upsides and the rest of it. And we have something that's more clearly presented. This is the format that I use. There's nothing special about it. I'm sure there's better ways, but this worked for me. So for an example, you are the Gotham City Council, and Gotham has a problem with rubbish in the streets. The proposal has a title, which gives us a way that we can refer to it. It has a summary of the problem or opportunity. So in this case, the problem is that there's rubbish everywhere and the city smells bad. It has one or more goals listed, and these goals should be quantitative and they should have some kind of a timeline attached. The goal for this proposal is to reduce rubbish from 10,000 items per square kilometre to 100 items per square kilometre by the 1st of January. That's very clear. And then the last thing is just a list of risks that are associated with that proposal. That's what the stakeholder prepares and brings to the technology organisation. We then add two more very important items, and these are estimates for cost and for value. Everybody's cool estimating cost of things, and probably a bit of an overemphasis on cost, but it's very difficult to get people to talk about estimating the value of something. But it's essential too, because we can't make a decision here unless we can establish that there's a good gap between the value that we expect and the cost that we expect. So one technique you can use when somebody's sort of being difficult and refusing to to clarify what the value of an initiative is you can say something like, well, if it cost $200,000, would you do it? Sure, I'd do it for $200,000. Well, if it cost $300,000, would you do it? No, that would be too much. So, okay, we've established that its value is near enough to $250,000 and we can continue. So there always is some idea of what the value is. It just can be tricky to get to it. This is my favorite part, strategic product planning. There's three main steps here. The first one is we need to clarify what our desired objective is. We need to be clear about where it is that we're trying to get to. So this could be for the technology team. It could be for one project among many. It works at various levels within an organization. Once we know where we want to go, then we need to find the optimal path between where we are and where we want to be. And then the third thing is that strategies are continuous, they're not discrete. So the passage of time, the change of your environment, the last piece of work you did, all of these are inputs to your strategic planning process. So as they change, which they do constantly, so too should your plan. So we need to be constantly checking our assumptions and making sure that the idea we came up with yesterday is still the best one in today's world. So remember the issue we had with Gotham City Council and the rubbish in the streets? Okay, so we're going to do this strategic planning exercise to help them out. Firstly, we need to have our goal, okay? These can be on different time frames. For the sort of startup world that I came from, a 3-month window felt pretty comfortable. There's enough time to do something, but not enough time that the things we came up with would sort of become irrelevant before we got there. So for Gotham, the goal is to clean up the city streets. Next thing we need to do is list the actors in this system. So these are the groups of people who can either help us to get to our goal or they can hinder us getting to our goal in some way. So in Gotham, those are the citizens. They're key because they're the people discarding all the rubbish. And the police, because they're responsible for enforcing the law and behaviour around littering, and the cleaners, because they're the people trying to clean up all the mess. The next thing we want to do is come up with the impacts. This is, what are the things we need those actors to do to get to our goal? Or in what way do we need them to change their behaviour, would be another way of thinking about it. So for the cleaners, we need them to clean more somehow. Police need to enforce more. Citizens need to stop littering. This is an example of the idea I mentioned earlier about water flowing downhill. If I'm out and about in Gotham City and I find myself with a muesli bar wrapper, everybody else throws their rubbish on the ground. There aren't any bins. So what do? I throw my rubbish on the ground like everyone else because that's just the easiest thing for me to do in that situation. If you could make the easiest thing for me to do the right thing to do, then probably I would do that. Okay. Now we connect this to our team and what we can actually do. So we come up with some set of activities that we could potentially do and try to see how they map through to getting those actors to change their behaviours according to those impacts to get us to our goal. So with the cleaners, we want them to clean more. How can we do that? We can hire more cleaners, or we can have some kind of like incentivized pay system to see if we can get them to be more efficient. With the police, we can hire more police, or we could put in some kind of quota system. In terms of changing the behaviour of the citizens of Gotham, how can we get them to stop littering? We could run like a clean up Gotham marketing campaign, something like that, or we could install some bins. Okay. So then we need to say, okay, those are all the things that will potentially get us to where we want to go. We need to make some decisions. One way that we can potentially do that is via a voting process. It's not uncommon. So you might end up with some kind of votes that look like that, where each red dot is somebody voting on the initiative that they think is going to have the greatest impact. So they've chosen to install bins. That gives us a path from the initiative back to what we're trying to achieve. And it works in nicely with that idea of water flows downhill, people do whatever's easiest. So we've come up with a hypothesis that says if we made it easy for people to dispose of their rubbish, then maybe that's what they would do. This process is called impact mapping. And if you're interested, there's a book of the same title by Gojko Adzik that's very short and very good. So sometimes people will ask you to create a roadmap. I like a very simple framework for roadmaps. I divide things into a couple of categories, 3 categories. So there's now. This is the items that we're working on at the moment. And here I bring in a concept from Lean called limiting work in progress. So one thing I found, I had a small team in my organization, and the business always wanted all of their ideas implemented at the same time. Not really understanding that if I do 6 one-month projects at the same time, you don't get anything for 6 months. So by implementing a work in progress limit, so I said my team is only big enough to do 2 initiatives at any one time. That improves things greatly, and you're able to show more progress, work through those things, get feedback sooner, and go back to your map and update your strategy. And that works much better. There's a category called next. So these are the things we think we will probably do. They're just queued up at the moment behind what's in progress. And finally, there's a category called later, which, if I'm being entirely honest, is the things that we probably won't ever get around to. By the time we get there, the world will have moved and we'll have different priorities. Each item in these lists is a hypothesis that can be tested. As a species, we only have one good method for empirically establishing facts, and that is the scientific method. So let's apply that to our product strategies. The popular way of doing that is this idea of build, measure, learn. This is from the Lean startup. We begin with our hypothesis. I hypothesize that if I have a high density of bins in Gotham City, the citizens will prefer to put their rubbish in the bin and have a clean and healthy environment. That's my hypothesis. I don't know that to be true. So I need to run an experiment. I go start installing bins and I start measuring the density of rubbish in the city. Measuring the density, that's where we collect the results of our experiment. At this point, it's just data. And then we go through a process of trying to extract some kind of insight from that data. And from there, we can formulate another hypothesis, and the cycle continues. So that's strategy. We now know what we want to do, and then the question is, what's the most effective way of doing it? And again, this is probably a list of things that I learnt from CTOing the wrong way a little bit. And this is one of my favorites. Step 1, definition. So how do we define the work that we ask people to do? So often what I see is like a backlog or a spreadsheet of all the different things that I want done, and a timeline, like a deadline. So I want this exact work done in this exact time, and that is terrible, and I want that to just go away from the world, and I'll explain why. Think of like if you want an omelette and you've got some crazy French chef guy. Do you say, hey, I'd like an omelette that tastes really good? Or do you say, I want you to crack an egg in a bowl and give it a stir and then chuck it in a frying pan, right? Or if you need like a heart bypass, do you say, doc, fix my bung ticker? Or do you say, hold the scalpel like this and cut there and whatever it is that they do? We trust that these people are professionals and that they know their thing better than we do. But for some reason with technology, we don't see the world that way, and we sort of infantilize technologists, and we think, no, they don't understand the business nuance that I have, and if I give them too much room to make decisions, they'll they'll screw it up. So I've got to give them the precise steps. And I don't know why we do that, because I think it's patronizing. This is some data showing 20th century China, and so birth rate in orange and death rate in green. And the interesting part here is around about 1960, so the birth rate goes right down and the death rate goes right up. And this is what happens when leaders try to tell their subordinates how to do their job. Right? The Communist Party decided that they had heaps of food, they didn't need any more, they would sell more overseas because they wanted cash to pay down some debts, and that they would convert food crops into cash crops for a similar reason. And that's the result that they got. You may have seen this story or something along the lines of it, about how we only use 10% of our brains. Everyone seen that one? So apparently it's totally rubbish. It's not true at all. But I think there is a similar effect that happens in technology teams when you guide their work by like a conveyor belt of cards where I pick one up, I do it, and I send it on its way to the test team. There's this effect where very smart people just seem to turn off their cognitive capacity and do exactly what they're told and lose the will to live. And we don't want that. We want people to utilize their talents. So what my suggestion is, the way you solve that problem is you define work by giving a challenge with constraints. So in the example of the rubbish in Gotham, what's the challenge? I want the streets to be clean. What's the constraints? You have a certain amount of time, you have a certain amount of budget, something like that. Or you can actually just recycle that proposal, because that actually has a lot of the information that we want to give people. What's the goals that I expect to achieve? What are the risks that I've identified? And of course we add that time and cost constraint to that. So think about what would happen for you as a technology leader if you defined your team's work in a way like that. And bear in mind that the transition process can be uncomfortable, because you may like give somebody that proposal and come back in a week and find that they're still waiting for you to tell them what to do. But my experience was that it was a very positive transition once people engaged with it and took on the responsibility. So yeah, it empowers the team. It makes them much happier in their job, in my experience, and it also moves decision-making to competence. So as a technology leader, I'm removed somewhat from the details of the solution. I'm likely to be removed somewhat from the specifics of what underlies the problem. So you want to identify the person who has the information and get them to make the decisions. Okay, so changing how we measure, this is part of it as well. Story points per month is the worst. What you want to do is measure progress against those goals. My goal was to reduce the litter, so this is a result of the measurement step of our experiment. As we roll out bins, the amount of rubbish on the street goes down, so that's confirming our hypothesis. And as long as that's proceeding at an appropriate rate, we know this is a project that we should continue and should invest in. You can also look at it as a cost value type of thing too, if you wanted to. And obviously what you're looking for there is that at some point, reasonably quickly, the value should exceed the cost and continue in that direction. So I'll skip that one. What do we then do? Okay, so we've got some result. Maybe it's not as much as we want, so we go back to our map and we say, we've installed bins, what's the next thing we could do? We think hiring more cleaners is going to be the most valuable. We now have a new path back to our goal, and we can start the cycle all over again. So from a strategy perspective, there's the value formula, which I found to be really useful. You may not. Strategy. So the three key points there were to make sure you understand the objective you're trying to get to, plot out the most efficient path, and then keep reevaluating and making sure that that path is still the best. To test our hypothesis, we want to run an experiment, measure results, extract insights, and then create a new hypothesis and carry on that way. On the delivery side, I like the idea of defining work as a challenge with constraints. I think it brings out the best in people. We want to make sure that we're focusing on measuring outcomes, not outputs. If they did 10,000 story points in a sprint, who cares? It's not relevant. It's of no use to you at all. What you want to know is, are we getting to our goals? No, I didn't do that one. And that's the end. Thank you.